Nothing sounds better than a nice, good night's sleep, doesn't it? And hopefully, maybe you've got this in your earbuds right now as you're getting ready to doze off to dreamland. It is the Just Start the Conversation podcast, and it's brought to you by St. Luke's University Health Network. Joining me, as always, is Jody McLeod-Mismer, and we have a special guest today, Kim Adams. And I had that intro there talking about sleep because she is a sleep expert and a psychotherapist there at St. Luke's, and we are going to be talking about how your mental health and your sleep kind of are all in one thing and how one thing affects the other and all that good stuff. And so hopefully we are going to dreamland very quietly, but if not, we're here to talk. So Jody, I will start with you, my friend. How are we? How's things?
I'm good. Good morning. We had a first weekend without some rain, so I hope everyone enjoyed that. And if you're listening to this later, I'm sorry you missed it. But yeah, we're good. We're good. And so happy to have Kim here with us. We tried to not talk too much before we got here this morning because when you talk about sleep, it's amazing how different people have different experiences, and they want to know what is good sleep, what is bad sleep, what do you mean by that? And Kim actually has a special certification called CBTI, so I thought it would be a good idea to begin with what is that, and what do those initials mean, and why is that specific to sleep, and please help us understand. So Kim, welcome, and tell us about CBTI.
Right. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about sleep because, it's so important to how we feel as a human. Everything about our emotions, our memory, our interactions either relate to how we sleep, and then sometimes how we sleep relates back to those things. CBTI is not surprisingly a component of overall cognitive behavioral therapy, which most people have heard of. At its heart, it looks at our thoughts and our behaviors and says what changes need to be made within those for, improvement and being able to move kind of toward your valued goals in life. The I tacked on to the N stands for insomnia. And so it's saying, hey, we're going to begin by doing this very effective 6 or 8 week treatment for insomnia for a person, which sometimes then does springboard into working with them in general psychotherapy. But personally, when I have a client who I know is not sleeping well, I always say, hey, is it okay with you if we target this first? Because it's going to get us so much further ahead in anything we're trying to do in psychotherapy for the reasons I just named. Our emotions are more regulated. Our memory is better. They can remember anything that we talk about in session better. Our human interactions are better and more resilient. So that's going to help you respond to psychotherapy in general as well.
So are people, you mentioned if you're seeing individuals for psychotherapy and they bring up that there's a sleep issue, that you'll start there. So it sounds like you actually get referrals directly for insomnia. So you get referrals, or physicians send their patients to you specifically for sleep?
Yes, it's 2 different ways. I do get referrals specifically from our behavioral sleep medicine doctors who are often treating somebody for a sleep apnea, or who have tested them for it and ruled out a sleep apnea, but the person's still not sleeping. So they're saying, hey, go see Kim Adams and see if she can help you. I get them that way, but whenever I have a client walk through the door in general for psychotherapy, I also screen them for sleep. Often a person won't bring it up themselves, either because they have just learned to live with it. They don't think there's anything that can be done about it. Or they think that by getting effective mental health treatment, that it will resolve their sleep issues, which sometimes is the case. But in my experience, for reasons we might be able to go into today, often not. And so for those reasons, I'm always screening people for sleep. It's almost like you're guilty until proven innocent. You have to demonstrate to me that you're sleeping well before I'm like, okay, all right, okay, I'll leave it alone.
Yeah, full disclosure, when Kim came in today, Crockett, she made the statement that she can look in someone's eyes and tell if they were sleeping, and everyone just averted their eyes immediately. But
your eyes look lovely, Jody.
Oh,
so
great!
You passed my test.
I actually have a question about that, Kim, because you say that sleep is kind of your first target. You mentioned that for some people it may have just become something they've dealt with for so long that they don't even think about that may be an issue. Is that kind of a shocking thing for people at first when you kind of say like, hey, the first thing I want to know about is your sleep? Or is it, to your point, something that they have just been it's just been such an issue for so long that they don't even think like, oh, this could be the reason behind how I'm feeling. Just kind of that initial, is that kind of a shocking thing to hear from you, do you think, when you get a patient and the first thing you say is, how well are you sleeping?
I do think so. I think that's kind of the cognitive part of CBTI, which is I've learned to live with it. And paradoxically, a lot of times a person will have they were trying to sleep better. It's not that they're doing the things that we know are bad for sleep. When I have a latte at 6:30 in the evening, I know I'm not going to sleep well. I'm not going to go see a doctor or a therapist about that. But a lot of times some people's, it's almost their daytime waking lives are consumed by how well am I going to sleep tonight? Okay, what should I try differently? They're trying really hard to sleep better. And then they think that, well, I've tried everything I can. So when they sit down with me and I'm like, no, I have an idea. It is kind of surprising for them. Coupled with, once we do an actual CBTI sleep intervention, they respond so quickly to it that sometimes it's a feeling of, wow, I wish I'd met you a couple of years earlier or a decade earlier.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So what are the, sorry, Crockett, what are the reasons that someone might come to you for therapy, but in reality it's a sleep issue? What are the symptoms that person may be experiencing when in reality it's a sleep deprivation or a lack of good sleep?
Yeah.
What are the symptoms that those people are coming to you with?
Yeah, well, it's usually not an either or.
Okay.
It's usually both and. But if you look at the diagnostic criteria for almost all mental health disorders, they include impaired sleep in some form. A classic example being depression, either sleeping too much or spending too much time in bed, or often you see somebody waking up far earlier than they want to and not being able to go back to sleep. So I often, I can think of a client where I said, hey, let's initially do this sleep treatment. And what it really entails is kind of unexpectedly or paradoxically, you decrease the amount of sleep that somebody is permitted to receive each night. And so you'll have somebody who's like, I'm trying to sleep more and you're telling me to sleep less. And I say, yes, because what that does is it builds up what's called our homeostatic sleep drive, which I often call sleep urge or sleep pressure or something like that. It's kind of like building up your hunger before a good meal. And if somebody has been trying to do a lot of things to sleep better, they're often starting to do relaxation exercises at 8 o'clock at night. And, sitting very, very still, trying to relax their body. And what that does, it's kind of like snacking before a big meal. And then when the time comes that their body might actually really want to fall asleep, it's already eaten up some of that sleep urge. And then they're not going to sleep well that night. They're going to wake up early. They're not going to be able to initiate sleep in the first place, something like that.
My mind is blown. I don't know about you, Crockett.
Yeah, it's funny because as she's saying that, I have a 4-year-old that we are trying to get out of napping. But we know when he gets his nap and we know when he doesn't get his nap because of just how his mood kind of swings. So we've gone from he would, when he was 2 or 3, would have like a little 2-hour midday nap. Now we're trying to kick that back to about an hour. And we're getting to the point now where it's like, okay, we can get to like one day where he's not going to take that nap and he'll probably be okay. If we try to go 2 days without a nap, that next night he is Thor. He's the Incredible Hulk. He is a superhero that can't be contained. So it is kind of fascinating to think that you're almost taking like it's not too dissimilar from that, almost taking the reverse approach. We're going to try to still give you this, but we're going to give it to you less to ultimately try to set up a better goal later on down the road. That is kind of a fascinating idea. I am interested as we talk about age, if I'm not getting off of our path a little bit too much here, just kind of the situations that you see. Are there a particular age group? I think I thought sleep apnea when I was in my teenage years and 20s was something that happened to, full grown adults. My dad having sleep apnea or something like that. And then I had a teammate on the road in college have to bring this whole machine with him to go to sleep. And he was the one kid that nobody wanted to share a room with. But exactly that kind of sleep apnea can affect anybody at any age. For you, Kim, do you see that maybe how much does age play a role in this? And the flip side of that is how much of this could be for somebody who's younger, just some of that stuff that your body's going through, and perhaps for somebody older, just some of that stuff that maybe your body's going through.
Right. Well, it's two different things. And apnea and insomnia are two different conditions. Apnea is actually a pulmonary disorder. And, that's treated by a doctor. And I think your roommate had what's called a CPAP machine. Mm-hmm. Now, they can be comorbid. And I will receive referrals for somebody who has comorbid apnea, because if they're not sleeping well, they're almost given to fail at the CPAP machine, because if I wake up in the night, I have this thing over my face, trying to get back to sleep. It gets so frustrating that everything kind of goes to pot. So actually, ideally, if somebody has insomnia and an apnea, if I was to receive them while they're kind of waiting for their machine to arrive, and I can remember, it's just a few-week process. If I can treat them for the insomnia, that puts them in a great position once they begin the CPAP to sleep through the night and get all of its benefits. In terms of your question about age, there's differences in how we sleep based on age, but I wouldn't necessarily say that those are really prominent in terms of the disorders we develop. The treatment I deliver is the same for somebody who's 18 or 80. And what it is initially saying, hey, let's do this intervention and let's keep a daily sleep log and see how you respond to it and go from there. You have different considerations. I sometimes have people who have retired from a very high energy job. I get some of your, PPL linemen. I had somebody who worked on a railroad for years who was so hyper that I would be like exhausted after our sessions. And I said, you don't have a sleep problem. You have a retirement problem. You don't exhaust yourself enough every day to sleep the way you used to. So that can be something. Obviously, adolescence, we have such a short-sighted way of addressing adolescent and sleep in our country. For very interesting evolutionary reasons, adolescents really are wired to go to sleep around midnight or 1 a.m. and wake up around 10 or 11 a.m. in the morning. And everything about our schools run contrary to that. And I think really, among other things, I'm thinking, if we're going to invest this much in education, don't we want the most bang for our buck by delivering it when these teenagers are best primed to be learning, which is kind of early afternoon or even early evening. So that's a topic that some states are addressing pretty effectively and some are still not really doing much about.
That's so funny. I used to argue that point with my mom all the time growing up, was to say, I learn better at 10 or 11, which is why I didn't want to get up at 5:45, because my bus came at 6:03 in the morning to start and have homeroom, I think, was at 6:37. It was like all these off things. But it's crazy to think about that, hearing you, a sleep expert, say, well, in reality, this is the case.
I know how well I would function if I was asked to come to work at 1 a.m. and do my best work. It just wouldn't happen. And that's the position that teenagers are in school. Mm-hmm. If I can digress a bit into the evolutionary reason for it, I find it fascinating. It really allows teenagers to develop by being awake when others are asleep. They're able to develop their peer groups. They're able to take risks and experiment, all those important developmental tasks that are also sometimes really aggravating as a parent to watch your kid go through. But they're important. They are important. As my Southern relatives would say, they bring you closer to God. And then, but they're still in the same vicinity as their parents. So if something really goes wrong, they can wake their parents up. And that's how they evolve that way. And then as you enter young adulthood, your sleep schedule gets more toward, earlier evening. You wake up earlier in the morning, and you go on that way. But that important part of adolescence, really, there is an important sleep component to why they want to sleep when they do.
Are there a certain number of hours? I know I've heard different things sometimes where, infant to 2, they have to sleep this many hours, and there's a reason for all of those hours of sleep. But for the most part, people talk about 8 hours of sleep. Where does that come from, and is that true, and does it change?
Short answer is that's a ballpark.
Okay.
We have different amounts. We go through these sleep cycles, which is interestingly named sleep architecture. And if you draw it, it really looks like a city skyline. You go through these different stages of depth of sleep and non-REM sleep, and then you go through a period of, you spend about 20% of your your sleep in REM sleep. And each individual has a slightly different amount of time that it takes them to cycle through each of those stages. And then it's usually thought that we cycle through that 5 times a night, and that's what we mean by restful sleep. So if I go through those stages pretty rapidly, maybe I need 6.5, 7 hours of sleep. If I go through them more slowly, I might need more like 8.5 or 9 hours of sleep. I would say once you hit young adulthood, I don't think that changes very much across the course of the rest of your life. It does get harder to sleep well as an older adult, but that doesn't mean you don't need that much sleep. It's just harder to get that amount of sleep.
Okay. Interesting.
I feel like a lot of what we talk about in this podcast is kind of put in almost 2 very different baskets. One is your own self-awareness. And a lot of times, Jody, you can attest to the fact that we've kind of talked about being the person in the seat next to that person. So a significant other, a family member. I think about, I feel like it's very easy to almost dismiss sleep. Like you talk to somebody, hey, what's going on? You've seemed a little out of sorts lately. Oh, I haven't been sleeping well. You go, oh, okay, well, that's an obvious answer. Maybe that's just it. They haven't been sleeping well. As a person in a significant other role, a family member, a friend who suddenly notices this pattern of, signs that would be depression or anxiety or things of that nature that maybe almost maybe some things that could be a little bit next level, Kim, is kind of what I'm thinking, that maybe somebody could notice with somebody that's not just, oh, you haven't been sleeping well lately, but maybe some of those signs that say, hey, this isn't just like, try to, take a little something to try to help you go to sleep versus have you considered talking to somebody? Because this feels like a problem. I hate to use the word problem. This feels like a matter, a situation that hasn't really gone away and seems to kind of keep lingering around for you, looking at you as the person who's kind of going through what you're going through.
Right. Well, probably in my personal life, if I observe that with somebody, and they were saying something like, yeah, I'm not sleeping well. One of my favorite expressions is tell me more. And that opens the door for saying, is it really a sleep thing? Is something on your mind? What can I do for you? But it's not invasive. If they kind of look at me and they're like, not into it. I'm like, no worries, no harm. What I really would advise against, since I kind of have the soapbox for the moment, is suggesting something like, oh, try, you name it, melatonin, Benadryl,
Sure.
A light box, a sound machine, a solution, because I guess each of those things has its place, but that doesn't mean that's where you would start with somebody. You want to start by understanding more about what they're experiencing. Sleep, being able to say, I didn't sleep well, it's kind of one of those fairly palatable things, such as, I'm stressed, I'm busy, oh,
Sure.
I'm the same, same as always. Anything like that it's kind of a non-answer. And, I would want to know more before I would recommend anything at all for somebody.
So it sounds like there are things that we can do, not the melatonin, the Benadryl, and those pieces. But what are things that you would recommend to someone as a professional? People who are listening to this right now are saying, I wish I could sleep better. Maybe they're not having sleep deprivation because that, and maybe you can explain what that is. But what are things that we should be doing or could be doing that gives us better sleep hygiene? We had a chance to talk a little bit before the podcast about what hygiene is when it comes to sleep, and you had an interesting. You explained it kind of like the dentist. So if you wouldn't mind, what's sleep hygiene, and then what are some simple things that people could pay attention to?
Right. Well, yeah, sleep hygiene, it's kind of like flossing and brushing, what the dentist tells you to do. It's some of the obvious things, keeping your room a little cooler. Um, the real biggies that seem to matter with sleep hygiene are not using alcohol before bedtime and also keeping your room cooler. Sometimes you see, don't exercise before bed, but I would say that that's a little bit on a case-by-case basis. Some people really do well exercising and then going to bed, because what happens is that kind of enhances the decrease in body temperature that helps with sleep. So you can, you heat up when you exercise, and then your body says, oh, I'm cooling off now. Or taking a hot shower can do the same thing. I'm cooling off now. It's time for bed. Because obviously we evolved to sleep when it's cool out, when it's nighttime. Lost my train of thought. You're going to have to edit this part.
And that's why I write down that. There you go.
So most of my clients, I'm famous for something called the grandma rule. Like the grandmother rule. And the grandmother rule is, I don't do anything in bed that my grandmothers didn't do. And to your point, so one of my grandmothers worked on a farm. And so she got a lot of time outdoors. She got a lot of activity. That's going to help with sleep. But then the other thing, did my grandma have an iPhone in bed? No. Did she have a Fitbit? No. Did she have a television? No. Did she do paperwork on her, MacBook? Which, guilty, but no, she didn't. Now, what I do say, because this is on some people's mind, but they're embarrassed to bring it up. One of my grandmothers had 4 children. One of them had 6. So sex is okay. You can have sex in bed, and we want our brains to basically look at bed and say 2 things can happen here, sex or sleep. And otherwise, do it somewhere else. And that includes laying awake and worrying and staring at the ceiling. Jody and I were talking about, you wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, okay, if I fall back asleep right now, I can get 4 hours of sleep, I'll still be good. If you're awake in the night and you're awake, get out of bed. And it's such a hard rule to follow. But you don't want to spend time in bed when you're not asleep. So I would say that's one great across the board recommendation. Now, there are certainly individuals who can't get out of bed in the night for safety reasons. You might have somebody with mobility or vision issues. You might even have somebody who doesn't really have a place to go in their living situation out of their own bed. Those people, I will make an exception and do something called counter control, which means sitting up in bed, not making an effort to go to sleep for about 45 minutes if they're awake in the night. Doing things like reading, crossword puzzles, Sudoku, something like that, is okay, because you're still saying, I'm not laying in bed worrying, doing nothing. So that is an option. It's usually not my favorite when I'm working with somebody. I actually do like them to get out of bed and really consciously be saying, I'm not trying to fall asleep right now. In 45 minutes, I'm going to give it another go. But right now, cognitively, I'm not thinking about the fact that I'm not getting sleep. It's so hard when you wake up in the night to get out of bed. Many people know that recommendation, and it's hard to follow because cognitively there's this concept of, I need to catch sleep. And what if I get up right at the moment when I was going to fall back asleep? Well, I know if I'm awake in the night, I'm not going to fall back asleep anytime soon. I can be honest with myself, and I do get up. I'm not a hypocrite. I force myself to follow all the advice that I give to my clients. And then after about 45 minutes, I'll get back in bed and usually can reinitiate sleep. So that is part of the intervention I do with my clients. And part of the beauty of the job that I have, what I love about it, is I do get to see my clients every week. And I can follow them for things like that and make sure that they're following the intervention, and also just really be supportive and reinforcing to them, because it is really discouraging not to sleep well. And if I'm saying to them, you're even going to get less sleep than you were temporarily, a lot of times I'll tack onto that, and it's okay if you curse my name under your breath. I understand. And, when somebody really looks at me and says, this sounds difficult, I say, you are getting it. Yes, it is going to be difficult, and it is going to be worth it.
Yeah, I think it's mind-blowing to think that when someone wakes up, I think I think there's probably different levels, right? So if you wake up and use the bathroom and you're still sleepy and you head back to bed, you're heading back to bed and you're already tired. But I think when you're referring to this is someone who wakes up and they're like laying there, I can't fall back to sleep. You're saying, get out of bed.
Yeah.
And what do I do when I get out of bed? I'm not watching TV, I would assume.
You
Right?
can do anything. You can do anything. I tell people, bake me cookies. Nobody's baked me cookies yet. But anything that takes, I tend to go with 45 minutes just to make the point of don't get back in bed after 10 minutes and try again, and then get up again, and then get back in bed again. Get up and stay up for a while. You can read, you can watch a TV show. I tend to discourage doing anything that's truly productive because you don't want to give insomnia a function of, it's 3 a.m. This is when I do, my
Email
discharge notes that are, 3 months overdue. I don't know anybody who's 3 months. Just, but
I'm gonna write that. I'm about to write that down.
You don't want it to have a function, but you do want to kind of like wave your hands in the air and act like you don't care that you're awake in the night, rather than sitting there feeling really upset about it.
It's interesting because that whole concept to me, it's as if I've never heard that before. And I don't know about you, Crockett, but I that's mind blowing to me that you actually are saying, get up, don't lay there, because why? Because what am I doing if I'm laying there? I guess would be my question. Because if I were your patient, I would probably walk out of there going, well, I'm not going back there again. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's what happens. That's why nobody comes back.
Yeah, well, I think it's so contrary to, and I can't, obviously I'm not speaking for everyone, but I think it's a very contrarian thought to how at least I was raised. Like you stay in bed, you count sheep, you count bottles on the wall, like whatever you do. But it's interesting to hear you say, no, don't get up. Don't give insomnia function. Like get out of bed and do what you need to do. And I think that's just a concept that's contrary to what I would think I was supposed to do.
Yeah. Well, there's two answers to that. Officially sort of in my notes, what you're doing if you're laying in bed while you're awake is you're decreasing what's called your sleep effectiveness. We want to spend 90% of the time that we're in bed asleep. And that is really the number I reach for with my clients. I've had people who spend 12 hours in bed and get 6 hours of sleep. So that's a ratio of 50%.
So if I'm laying in bed, I'm wasting that 90%.
You're worsening that ratio,
Gotcha.
And we're trying to increase it.
That makes sense.
The other part of the CBTI intervention that goes hand in hand with this is I am decreasing your sleep window. I often show people my power cord when I'm talking to them, even virtually, and I'm saying, hey, if you're in bed from 9 p.m. until 6 a.m., this power cord stretched pretty thin. Your sleep is going to be pretty shallow and not refreshing. You're going to have a lot of wake-ups. What I do is I'm closing that. I might decrease it in that case to maybe 10:30 to 5 a.m. And, obviously my power cord dips, it drops, and that demonstrates your sleep is going to be deeper during that time. So the chance that you're even going to wake up in the night is decreased. But if they do wake up in the night, as our brain is creating this new learning about what it's supposed to do, I still do want them to get out of bed.
That is interesting. Well, I mean, especially because Jody, I'm right there with you, because it feels like the pattern of, listen, it's a very anxious thing to wake up. And for a lot of people, it's immediate anxiety. Like, I have to get back to sleep. I've got then you start thinking about what you've got going on the next day and all the things that you've got to do. And I've got to be up early as it is and do all of those things. And so I'm right there with you, Jody, in this thought process of just like, this is not what I would have suspected that answer to be. So I guess if we're, my wife is that person. I'm the person that could fall. If you guys told me to put my head down, there's a good chance I could fall asleep now if I wanted to. I've never, fortunately, knock on wood, sleep has never been a problem for me. My wife is the one that will get up and be the anxious person. Now I'm awake. What am I going to do? It's just, but hers also isn't such a pattern. So is like the pattern kind of the thing, maybe what you're looking for in this more so? We're all going to have nights where we wake up and we're like, oh, crap, I'm awake. But the pattern to it, that it's happening more often than it's not happening, is that kind of like what you're looking for a person in your shoes when you're talking to somebody kind of about their sleep history, for a lack of a better word?
I'm glad you asked that, Crockett, because I had the same question. How do I know it's a problem?
Yeah. Well,
Sure.
in terms of criteria, you look for something that has lasted for at least 3 months and is happening at least 3 nights a week. And that might be difficulty initiating sleep, maintaining it during the night, or waking up an hour or more before you want to in the morning. And I think the 3-month marker is an important one, because if somebody's going through an acute change in their life, you expect disrupted sleep. That's a pretty natural thing. That's called a precipitating event. That might be grief, loss, change, and adjustment. And that's not necessarily problematic in and of itself. But then what happens is, the attempt to compensate for that poor sleep becomes what's called a perpetuating factor. And that's somebody who starts to get in bed earlier than they're really meant to, or starts to have, sort of self-critical thoughts. What's wrong with me? I can't sleep anymore. What's this mean for me? Am I going to have dementia when I'm old? Things like that. That becomes a perpetuation of the sleep concern. And that is not going to go away. Even as they kind of absorb that change or loss in their life, they might still have these perpetuating factors that are keeping their sleep poor.
We're coming right back to talking about change having an effect on our mental health there, Jody. It was our last conversation. That changes can certainly, and I think, listen, to your point, Kim, I think a 3-month window that's a good, because, you would hope that you have adapted to whatever those changes are. But to your point, some of those things don't happen so easily. So a 3-month window, I feel like, gives a good barometer for people that are trying to figure out exactly what's going on. So one of the things that I always like to find out is, and we always talked about, Jody, where I'm going with this, talking to your family doctor, your general practitioner. But for people that do think maybe, okay, what I'm having is beyond just, oh, maybe I need to take some melatonin or a Unisom, to I'm having a consistent problem that is really affecting my day-to-day life. And I can tell it's not just me being tired. There's a lot more going on. Kim, for you, the first steps of that process to you, and perhaps maybe, we kind of talked about the signs a little bit, but just kind of that tipping point of, I know that I'm not just getting good sleep, to I know that this sleep is affecting my mental health. Just kind of the first steps in that process. If somebody does feel like what they're going through is a little bit more than just, I'm getting crummy sleep, just the first step somebody can take to try to get a solution to the problem.
Yeah, well, that brings up a good point, which is, I never think it's the wrong thing to talk to a doctor or an advanced healthcare professional about a concern. There can be a medical cause for poor sleep. It can even be a side effect of a medication. And I would hate for somebody to be going through what I do with them, and then come, lo and behold, it's a medication that they're taking that's causing it. We're not going to be able to, move that. So talking to a doctor about it, and then, I guess it's a personal decision, but, CBTI really is considered to be the first line intervention. And this is from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, prior to trying medication. So my recommendation with someone, if they and their doctor are willing, is to seek out CBTI and to begin that protocol. If it feels as if the sleep hygiene issues are, have been taken care of and really assessed well, and the person's still not getting anywhere.
So one of the things, Crockett, I want to make sure we don't miss is that individuals, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, the lack of sleep kind of affects people differently. So what are some symptoms that they might share with their physician that they're experiencing? Because I know I'm not nice when I don't sleep. Like, I'm not a friendly human, right? And so as then not being a friendly human, people might not want to really be around me. So if that happens for 3 months, But why are you laughing?
No, but just the cause and effect.
It's
It's just
true.
like, I'm not a friendly human,
I'm not a
and
friendly human.
this
I
is
think
gonna affect
I think a lot.
everyone.
There's actually a research article called "You Wouldn't Like Me When I'm Sleepy," and it's about how awful bosses can be to their
Sure.
subordinates if they haven't slept well.
Well, that escalated quickly.
Yeah.
I feel attacked now. No, but I would imagine, it causes loneliness because people then don't want to be around you.
It
right?
does. It really does. And, if you look at sleep, we think of sleep as an individual thing. How did you sleep? It's not. We evolved as humans along with how our sleep evolved and even our REM cycles. It's a cornerstone of civilization. What happened, very long story short, is because we harnessed fire, we were able to come down out of trees and sleep around the fire and be safe because the predators were afraid of the fire. So that, kept us all safe, but that kept us close too. So sleep, we evolved to be asleep all at the same time, which is kind of weird when you think about it. Why do we all want to be asleep at the same time? There must be something more important to sleeping together near each other than actual protection that's afforded to us by being awake. There's an amazing children's book called The Relatives Came, and this child, through the child's eyes, and noticing the feeling of safety and security when the house is full of relatives and everybody's breathing and sleeping at the same time. And I just love that because that's really, sleep is something that we do. I think the quality of our sleep represents how we're doing as a society. And, right now there's a lot of sleep problems. That's not just an individual problem we're having. If you look at the loneliness epidemic, I think these things go hand in hand. There's nothing that's more lonely than being awake in the middle of the night, feeling you're the only one and that nobody cares. So I think that's a component of what we're talking about. But one more thing about going, back into what's called sleep anthropology. How does sleep develop? What can we understand about it that's part of being human? Because we were on the ground, we were able to dream. What happens when you go into a dream state, thankfully, REM sleep, is your body basically gets paralyzed so that you don't act out your dreams. That'd be weird. So we get paralyzed, that's important. But if you're up in a tree, because that's where you sleep, and your body gets paralyzed, you're not going to last very long as a species. You're going to thump to the ground and it's all over. But because we were able to sleep on the ground, our REM sleep developed. And that's where creativity comes. That's where emotional regulation comes. That's where the kind of all of the chatter that builds up during the day when we're awake and like, that kind of makes me mad. I can't believe you said that. That gets kind of all shushed out during dreams. That's where we process it all. And then we wake up, and that's where we feel refreshed and kind of literally feel like a human being when we wake up and we're able to interact with others. If you're not sleeping well, that process is much, much more difficult when you're awake.
I think what I've learned today is that sleep is way more important than I entered into this conversation thinking it was. I mean, not that I didn't think it was important. I do think it's important. But I think, Kim, what you've been able to kind of suss out is to say it's really, really important. And so this should be a conversation that you're having with your physician. This should be something that you're taking into consideration, but also that you probably shouldn't be looking for chemicals or whatnot to assist until you figure out what's actually happening, right? Like, I shouldn't be, because you mentioned this earlier, I should be avoiding alcohol. Even though alcohol might make me fall asleep, the quality of my sleep is not there. I should be watching caffeine intake. I should be aware. So I think you've given really good tips and tools. And I think, quite honestly, the most important piece is that we need to take sleep more seriously, and that it affects everything, including our relationships.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of hand in hand with that, for folks who don't sleep well, I think it's really important to have compassion to yourself. And, not beat yourself up if you don't sleep well, whether that's any given day or just kind of an ongoing thing. Be kind to yourself and, do ask for help if you can. But it is, just as much as sleep is so important, it's also important to say not sleeping well is a really big determinant of mental health. So be gentle with yourself if you're not sleeping well.
I think my biggest takeaway is that I really appreciate pillow top mattresses. After knowing how fidgety I would be in a tree, I would not, it wouldn't go well. It
Yeah.
wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, there'd need to be a hammock, something there to catch me if it didn't go well. Well, she is Kim Adams. She is a psychotherapist and a sleep expert over there at St. Luke's. Kim, great insight today, Jody. I'm right there with you. I have a whole different perspective on how much a good night's sleep can actually mean leaving this conversation. So, Kim, thank you for all the insight today. We certainly do appreciate all the knowledge you were able to drop on us. So, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And Jody, as always, a pleasure. Let's go. Naps for both of us.
No, guys, no naps.
No,
no,
we're not napping.
No.
We're not napping.
We'll edit that.
We're gonna edit that. Yeah.
We'll edit that. But I'm tired just thinking about sleep. But to you, my friend, as always, I wish you well and another great episode. So thank you.
Thank you.
It is the Just Start the Conversation podcast with no naps, and it's brought to you by St. Luke's University Health Network. Find it on Google, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're getting your podcasts. We're at sluhn.org.